Hey guys, TNLC or whoever is watching this video, I wanted to take some time to be able to share some additional thoughts on the current racial tensions, circumstances. I don't even know the right, I was English education major and I'm not really even sure the right words to describe the heartache, just absolute tragedies that we find ourselves in right now. And I wanted to come at this from a perspective of what I have learned as a white person, some of the things that I've had to learn and language that I have tried to either adopt using or to stop using. And I want to be able to offer those insights here. I know that if you're in my church or in a church that sometimes the pastor carries a certain weight in his words, and so I'm trying to measure in the idea that I don't have all the answers and don't feel like I have everything perfect and understand everything perfect. But I also think that it's important to share what I have learned. And so I understand that this might be coming from pastor, but I'm not trying to say that these are official TNLC edicts or what everyone has to believe, but these are the things that I have learned as an individual over 20 years of getting into conversations around race, around black and white and Asian, and trying to understand the backgrounds, the presuppositions, the way things are heard and the way things are said. Right now, I think that there are a lot of great conversations taking place around the question of race, of racism, of power dynamics, of white privilege. I think there's a lot of really great conversations taking place around those. One of the things that happens at times is that white pastors will grab an articulate black man or woman, sometimes another pastor or not, and they'll kind of bring them on and discuss in those ways. And I think those are incredibly valuable conversations. Two of my best friends did that. Brent Gerard and Adrian Crawford did that with Brent's Church in Focus on their Instagram and had a long conversation about that. I'm not trying to say that those aren't necessary. But I think in addition to those, what is necessary is to have some white to white conversations. Because I have rarely seen people press back on circumstances where there are, let's say, a mixed race panel, mixed race instruction. It's a lot of times the after that, or the side conversations, or the after dinner conversations, or the it was just a joke conversations, or where a lot of times there can be, I'm not racist, but I'm not racist, it was just a joke. Those are the kind of areas where I think that there's an incredible opportunity for a lot of white people to grow in the way that they communicate, understanding that their intention does not always come across because of their language. And how do we learn from that? How do we learn and grow? So I'm not here to try to be able to speak with complete authority or to rebuke people because I've always gotten it right. This is what I've learned in how to adjust my language to be more in line with what's helpful for people who I'm trying to communicate with and to be able to be reflective of the gospel itself. So here's a couple things. First of all of this comes from the idea that you want to love your neighbor as yourself. And the reason for Christians that you love your neighbor as yourself is that you love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And because you love God in that way, you're free to love your neighbor as yourself. And what that means is to not just only think about the way that you love yourself, but to think about if you were your neighbor, how would you want to be loved? If you were your neighbor, how would you want to be treated? Not just, I wish my neighbor would take on my perspective, but sometimes it means trying to take on the perspective of your neighbor, even if it's not the one that you have, but you're doing that because you love them. Here's another thing that I would recommend having as a perspective. Number 2, do not say the phrase, I don't see color, I just see people. I understand what you are trying to say in that, but I don't think it is having any positive effect. And when being able to say, I don't see color is almost entirely something that people with white skin get to say. Because you don't really have your life at times, most of the time, has not been defined by the fact that you have white skin. For most people of color, they have been aware almost their entire life and are constantly being communicated at and being communicated to based on the color of their skin. So when we say things like, I don't see color, I just see people, we're kind of speaking about the fact that we've never really had to experience the tension or the degradation of being looked at because of our race and skin color. But the other thing is, you're kind of taking away the beauty of people's cultures, people's backgrounds, people's skin, different hair, different likes, dislikes. Like, you kind of take that away. And we don't want people to be of no color. If God wanted people to be of no color, He would have made them all no color or a singular color. The fact that there is diversity should be recognized and should be celebrated. And when you say, I don't see color, you're also trying to tell people that perhaps their experience is not as valid as they believe that it is, because they do see the world at times through the lens of color. So number two, I don't think it's helpful to say that I don't see color. I think we should see color so we can see that everything is equally beautiful, made by God, and the way that He intended it to be. Another phrase that I have found to not be very helpful at all is all lives matter. Now, see, here's the thing. That's a truth, but it's being used as an unhelpful and mistimed truth. I've been in hospitals, I've been in NICUs, and I have been to funerals and officiated funerals. I've never had anybody stand up at a funeral, look at the family members and say, what are you upset about? Everyone dies. I've never seen anyone go up to a young family, a mom who's lost a baby, lost a pregnancy, and say, all babies die, all humans die, what does it matter? That's true, but it's not a helpful truth, and it's at the wrong time. Just because it's true doesn't mean that it needs being said. If all lives matter, that means that Black lives do matter. And it's interesting that we have such a reaction to the phrase Black lives matter when it's never been Black lives better, Black lives only matter. I heard a comedian talk about this, about people are like, he's like, we're just trying to say matter, not better, not greater, just matter. And yet even in that, when so many African Americans and people of color have felt for so long that their life doesn't matter, for them to be able to express that sentiment somehow then gets shouted down because there are injustices or other colors. And those things can be true, and it can be true that Black lives do matter. So while it may be true that all lives do matter, if they do, you should look to the ones who have lost or never had a proportional voice to their humanity. Over and over again in the scriptures, in the Proverbs, there's a disproportionate talk of, in the Psalms, the poor, the widow, and the orphan. Does that mean that God loves the poor, the widow, and the orphan more, or that rich, married, and families don't matter to Him? Not at all. It's because the poor, the widow, and the orphan are most likely to be pressed down and oppressed by society. So they need a disproportionate amount of conversation about them to bring them to an even playing field with everyone else around us. And so by saying Black lives matter, by saying Asian lives matter, you don't diminish the lives of other colors or other ethnicities. All you're doing is trying to bring up people who have been overwhelmingly treated individually and systemically as less than. You're trying to just bring them up to even. And especially at a time when so many African Americans and people of color feel like their life doesn't matter, I don't think that's the time to go yell and scream, all lives matter. I mean, Jesus even said, blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are the merciful. We don't stop Jesus in the middle of these Beatitudes and say, no, Jesus, all people matter, all lives matter. What He's doing in that moment is trying to use a disproportionate amount of language and communication to create an equality of humanity and equality of worth and value in the eyes of everyone, because this is a group that most easily and most often is overlooked and thought less than and don't matter. And so it's not exclusive to say because Black lives matter that blue lives don't matter and vice versa. It's not at all. We have to stop letting ourselves be drawn into these dichotomies. I don't think it is helpful, and I have not found it to be helpful, to proclaim that all lives matter. Most of the people who are doing that have been white people from a Judeo-Christian perspective who have been rightly called out on the fact that they will fight very hard for abortion to be outlawed, but then not always care for the poor, the widow, and the orphan. Now, that's not exclusive. There are a great many groups that are doing all those things and a great many individuals who care about all of those things. But in the same way we understand that calling for one doesn't mean oppressing the other, we should understand that when it comes to this. I think that we have to think about, and this goes back to the idea of I don't see color. I think we have to think about how often we have been talked about and understand this idea of white privilege. This is being brought up over and over and over again. And there's a lot of frustration and confusion as the white people have said, wait, why am I being labeled this when I'm white? Why am I being labeled this when just because I'm a white male? Why do I get lumped in with this? That's not fair. How dare you accuse me of this? I think if you've ever experienced that and experienced that frustration, you're starting to see just the tiniest glimpse of what it looks like to be lumped into particular groups because you're Black, you're Asian, you're Latino. How many times do we easily and quickly generalize people because of their skin tone? Now, for the first time, it's really beginning to come on to white people to evaluate themselves in that way. And there's a quick and immediate press back of like, I don't like that, and that's not fair to group me in with all white people because of the color of my skin. You are correct. So in the same way, that should illuminate us how much and how quickly other people of other skin colors are grouped together and thought usually less than because of their skin color, and they don't want to be grouped together either. So you understand then how uncomfortable that must be and why it shouldn't be allowed to happen to other people, not just when you don't like it happening to you. But think about how much, again, this is what you want to talk, this is some white on white, not white on white crime, but just some white on white accountability. How often you really thought about yourself as white? Think about when you're describing friends or describing people. Think about how often you say, he was tall, he had brown hair, he had blue eyes. And then think about how many times you'll say, Black guy, about 6 feet tall, or I was this Asian guy that I work with. And think about how often when there's a guy or a girl, they're just a guy or a girl, and then somebody of another color, another ethnicity, we lead with their ethnicity. And it's so often, so much of our life has not been about being defined by our skin color. That's one of the main privileges of being white, is that your life has not been defined by your skin color. And that's just not the case for so many people of color. So, not saying that you fought for a white privilege, not saying that you claimed it and you wrestled it away and you're standing with it proud, but it is important to understand that if you haven't had to wrestle with what it really means to be white and what that means and the advantages and disadvantages of that for very much of your life, maybe you've done it over the last few years, some of you might be doing it for the very first time, that is a privilege, to have not had your entire life be defined by the fact that you are not being defined by your whiteness. And so we just have to be aware of those kind of things and be careful how we use those language, and don't be so quick to press against the idea that you might have a white privilege just because you didn't ask for it or granted it, it wasn't inherited to you. I think you have to look at the way that you view authority. I've always viewed authority as for me. I have not been worried getting pulled over. I generally think that things are going to be fair and for me. And that's not the case for a large portion of not just African Americans, but for particularly the marginalized, poor, the needy, and many people of color. There have been overwhelming studies that have shown that African Americans have been treated unfairly in a systemic way, whether it was police departments, whether it's housing, gerrymandering, different things like this, over and over and over again have shown that there has been a public conscious collusion of people to keep blacks out of certain places. This St. Petersburg, this happened, for decades. The St. Pete Times put a story out about it 3-4 years ago of discovering this taking place in housing. So understanding, why aren't you trusting? Why don't you just follow? Those narratives are really kind of falling apart right now, and I think rightfully so. We've always believed that authority is, I won't say that, I've always believed authority is for me, and it's hard when you have never really felt that to then really trust in that. And I applaud there's so many great stories. The Flint, Michigan police chief sheriff who took off his gear and talked with people and hugged them and walked with them. I think that's such a great example of what that looks like. But we're also seeing pictures of the opposite happening in New York and different places like that. I can't document, I'm not here to document all those things, but it's understandable why you don't believe that authority is always for you. I think this is a tremendous time to listen with humility and with peace. Not to be like, I know, right? It's okay to sit in wondering how much you participate in this. It's okay to sit and wonder how much you have owned this, how much you've been a part of it, in jokes flying or things being said. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't ever change. But if you don't think that you need to change, you're probably never going to. So my encouragement is to be humble, to listen to the Spirit of God, to ask questions, to not assume you're fine, but to actually review these things and not just say, here's the language I want to use, here's the language I want to say. What is actually being a blessing to other people? What will actually serve them? What does it look like to turn the other cheek right now if you're a Christian? What does it look like to, if they take your coat, give them your shirt also? What does it look like to go above and beyond to serve those who are hurting and scared and afraid around you? It will cost you something. And maybe that's what it's worth. But maybe what you're going to get back is infinitely more valuable than anything that it would cost you. And what you're giving is infinitely more valuable than anything that it might be costing you. My encouragement is to lead with humility. My encouragement is to lead with listening. And to don't be so quick to say, I know, but to ask questions, to listen, and to not just use these easy phrases to fill up or to press back so that you don't have to really feel the weight of it. Be okay feeling the weight of it. Be okay feeling the scary tension of it. Make sure that you don't think any false thoughts about those or any kind of generalization thoughts about an entire group of people who are of one particular skin color or one particular gender. Because think about how many people who have your skin color are different than you. Think about how many people who have the same gender as you are completely different than you. You would want to be treated as an individual. You would not want to be lumped in. And so let's treat people as people. Let's treat people, every single one, with no matter what skin color they have, as made in the image of God, with the same spark of the divine inside of them that we have. And when we stop looking at mobs, when we stop looking at groups, when we stop looking at colors and we look at a person, it shows us how much our lies and stereotypes and presuppositions fall down. And the more individuals we see, the more that the Jenga blocks of our perspectives on and stereotypes of these entire people begin to crumble because we've met too many people who don't fill them in. We've met too many people who aren't like that we can't hold those standards anymore. Again, I'm not trying to come and say, look, I'm going to rebuke all of you and I'm going to yell and I'm going to be angry or any of those kind of things. I'm telling you, over 21 years of wrestling through this and having conversations and still learning about it, these are some of the lessons that I have learned. And while I think it is incredibly valuable to hear from perspectives that are different than us, I think that there is also an accountability and a level of maturity and looking in the eye and again, like holding people accountable, that white people need to do with other white people, so that we're not just passing the buck and waiting for somebody of a different skin color to come in and rebuke us. We can rebuke us. We can challenge each other. We can call each other. We can hear each other. Let's do that so that we become not just a bunch of individuals, but the people of God, multicolored, multifaceted, multi-ethnic, multi-voice, the multicolored wisdom of God, proclaiming and beginning to see the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. I love you guys, and I'm very appreciative for anybody who listened to this whole thing through. If there are questions, clarifications, corrections, rebukes, challenges that you'd like to offer for this, conversations you'd like to pick up because of this, I'd be more than happy to have them at pastor@trinitynewlife.com.